What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you were into the fight talk. We have Kiko Martinez, 43 wins, 10 losses, and 2 draws, defending his IBF Featherweight title against Josh Warrington, 30 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw. This is actually a rematch between the two. They had first fought back in May of 2017, and Josh Warrington won a close majority decision over Kiko Martinez. Now, this is a very improbable path back to the rematch, especially under the conditions in which it's being fought, with Kiko Martinez being the champion and Josh Warrington being the challenger, because it was Josh Warrington who just a couple years ago went on a sensational run, and he was beating the likes of Lee Selby for the belt and then defending it successfully against then still elite Carl Frampton, and then defending in a close controversial win against Kid Galahad. But then he ran up against Mauricio Lara, and just before that he had relinquished, he being Josh Warrington, relinquished his IBF Featherweight belt because he didn't want to go back over the same guys he had already defended against. Basically, the IBF wanted him to fight Kid Galahad again. Josh Warrington wanted to fight, take on just bigger and better matchups to further solidify his legacy. So he dropped the IBF belt. Then he fights Mauricio Lara. And at the time, Lara is very little known, but this guy came out of nowhere, almost like a Marcos Maidana or a Ricardo Mayorga. Basically, this guy was just a bat out of hell and had immense punching power. So he ended up dropping Josh Warrington multiple times, and by the end of this fight, which resulted in a 9th round knockout of Josh Warrington, where like for half the fight it seemed like Josh Warrington, after getting hurt the first time and dropped like very badly, it seemed like his legs never really recovered, and Mauricio Lara ended up knocking him out like cold in the 9th round, and then they try to run it back several months later. So the knockouts took place in February of 2021, one of the knockouts of the year, one of the upsets of the year, and then they try to run it back, and it ends up being stopped due to a headbutt. Now, a lot of people think that Josh Warrington was looking for a way out and intentionally caused the headbutt. I wouldn't go that far, but I will say that his style of, we'll say, intercepting Mauricio Lara's advances into the pocket were such that Josh Warrington would keep a high guard, keep his legs kind of wide, and then would get into like a low crouch, but his low crouch would have his forehead directly pointed at Lara, and he would kind of crouch while stepping forward. So basically, Lara in the first fight was blasting Josh Warrington with long-range missiles that it just seemed like in a lot of these combinations, with the punch trajectory of Mauricio Lara, the ring coverage of his long punches, and his power, it was just having a devastating effect on Josh Warrington. So what I read looking at the rematch and rewatching the rematch was that the strategy was to not stay at the end of the arm's length of Mauricio Lara, leaving yourself susceptible to getting caught with the same types of punches. I thought Josh Warrington was crouching low, and then when he sensed that Mauricio Lara was going to come in, because when Mauricio Lara comes in, he basically just throws, it's like a near haymaker. It's not quite a haymaker, but he's like kind of putting his head down and whipping a overhand right hand, and then following it up with a hard left hook. And so Josh Warrington would be facing Lara, step forward, but step lower. But then when he would step lower, at the end of the step, he would start to, level up with his head a bit. So then when Mauricio Lara would jump in with this right hand, Warrington's forehead would be intercepting Mauricio Lara's body path as he's lunging in with the punch. And they clashed heads badly in the first round, and then in the second round, and the fight was stopped at the end of the second round. By the end of this, there were like 3 hard headbutts where you saw Lara's reaction to every one, just, grimacing and demonstratively looking displeased by the fact that he was getting headbutt repeatedly. So we basically never got to see, at least at this point, how a rematch between Warrington and Mauricio Lara would play out. But I didn't think it was looking great for Warrington because he was starting to get caught by a couple of those hard shots. And we just saw Mauricio Lara fight again. The guy's an absolute madman. I mean, he's susceptible to getting hurt himself, which he did in his last fight against Emilio Sanchez. But he just knocked Emilio Sanchez out cold by the end of the third round. This was a pretty exhilarating fight while it lasted. It just took place a couple weeks ago. Mauricio Lara's return to the ring versus Emilio Sanchez did. But I was saying that this is a very improbable road to the rematch between Warrington and Kiko Martinez, or in this case, it's got to be called Kiko Martinez versus Warrington 2 because it's Kiko Martinez that's currently the featherweight champion. Now, Kiko Martinez used to be champion like 8-9 years ago, but this was one weight class below. This was at super bantamweight, 122. So in February of 2013, Kiko Martinez fights Carl Frampton. This is when Carl Frampton is like at his absolute best. Like, yes, Frampton and Santa Cruz had a lot of big fights and success at 126 featherweight, but their best weights were actually like 122. And Carl Frampton beat Kiko Martinez via 9th round TKO in 2013. That was for like one of those regional European 122 belts. Well, then 2 fights later, Kiko Martinez ends up finding himself in a fight for the IBF 122 belt against Jonathan Romero. And this again is in 2013, and Kiko Martinez ends up beating Romero via 6th round TKO for the IBF 122 belt. He retained it, defended it successfully a couple times, and then he lost it in a rematch to Carl Frampton. So he loses to Frampton right before he fights for the title. Then he loses that title to Carl Frampton. This is 2014. And then after that, Kiko Martinez, who's been around obviously a long time, he's like, what, 37 years old now, which is very old, especially in these lower divisions. So he just turned 36 years old. But after losing that IBF belt to Carl Frampton in their rematch, it's pretty much been a case of, you know, Kiko Martinez will win a lot of fights, and he'll win a lot of fights by knockout because he has a lot of power. More power, I would say, than Josh Warrington, hands down in my opinion. But Kiko Martinez, after those 2 fights with Frampton, it's kind of been he'll beat all of the non-elite guys and non-near elite guys and non-elite guys. And then when he fights an elite guy, he'll lose, sometimes via knockout. So like a couple fights later, he challenged Scott Quigg for the WBA regular super bantamweight 122-pound title, and he lost to Scott Quigg via 2nd round TKO. He won his next 4 fights, then he fights Leo Santa Cruz, another elite guy. But this now is up at featherweight 126. So he fights Santa Cruz for the WBA super featherweight title, a belt that Santa Cruz still holds to this day. Think about that. With, you know, Santa Cruz has lost since this. He got knocked out by Gervonta Davis. He hasn't defended his super featherweight. And by super, I just mean the belt distinction. Super title versus regular title. It's confusing. But, you know, they have 2 titles almost per division for the WBA. But yeah, Santa Cruz has had that WBA super status for a while. And yeah, he stopped Kiko Martinez in 2016 in the 5th round. And so then Kiko Martinez fights another couple fights. One of them's a draw, one of them's a win. And then he has that fight against Josh Warrington. And this is for one of those intercontinental regional belts for the WBC. You know, the public is kind of split on who won that fight. It was interesting because, you know, they're both combination punchers. Warrington ended up being, you know, more the person who was moving around the ring, while Kiko Martinez, the shorter fighter, was doing the stalking. And so, you know, Warrington would move around, keep his jab out there, and then hop in at certain times, and then let his hands go, and then reset, move around the ring, and, you know, rinse and repeat. He hurt Kiko Martinez a couple times. He was hurt himself against Kiko Martinez. Again, Kiko Martinez has big power, but Warrington was awarded the majority decision win. Kiko Martinez then goes on to fight 4 more fights, wins 3 out of the 4. The other one was a draw, so he goes 3-0-1 over his next 4 fights. Fights Mark Vidal, fellow Spaniard, twice. First one is a draw, and then the second one he beats Mark Vidal, and then that's what got him another title shot, this time against Gary Russell Jr. for Russell's WBC featherweight belt. Gary Russell Jr. stops Kiko Martinez in the 5th round. just totally outclassed him, ended up stopping him in the 5th. Gary Russell was looking like a pound-for-pound sensation with, some of the fastest hands in all of boxing, any division, and he made pretty quick work of Kiko Martinez. But this just kind of goes back to that pattern of Kiko Martinez winning most of his fights still, but losing anytime he has a step-up fight against Carl Frampton, Leo Santa Cruz, in this case Josh Warrington, and certainly against Gary Russell Jr. So now we're talking like 2019, Kiko Martinez wins his next couple fights and then fights, rising, I'd say prospect/contender, Zelfa Barrett. Zelfa Barrett outboxes him, kind of out-sweet sciences him, moves around the ring, and Kiko Martinez sticks to his, game plan of stalking and looking for some big shots, and Zelfa Barrett wins that one via unanimous decision. 2 fights later, Kiko Martinez finds himself in another title fight against Kid Galahad this time. Kid Galahad, by the way, was one of the guys who Josh Warrington, as I mentioned, defended his IBF Featherweight belt successfully against. He had defended it again against Carl Frampton, Kid Galahad. Josh Warrington, again, was on a great run. It was sensational because it was a little bit improbable. He was a good fighter, but we didn't know that he was that damn good until he won that title against Lee Selby and then beat Carl Frampton and Kid Galahad. Even though the Kid Galahad, again, was a controversial one where the public is split, many thought that Galahad deserved the win there. But Galahad actually ended up winning the IBF Featherweight belt against Jazza Dickens in a vacant title fight where Kid Galahad stopped Dickens in the 11th round. He just schooled Dickens. Dickens, by the way, at one point had beaten Lee Wood, who we just saw fight, I believe, will end up winning. I mean, we haven't seen the rest of the year, but I'd be hard-pressed to find a fight better than Lee Wood versus Michael Conlan. Wow. But yeah, Jazza Dickens actually beat Lee Wood via decision a couple years ago, but Kid Galahad stopped Jazza Dickens in the 11th round, which earned him the IBF Featherweight belt. And in Galahad versus Martinez, you heard like the commentators, because this was in Sheffield, England, Galahad's hometown. This fight, by the way, Kiko Martinez versus Josh Warrington 2 is going to be fought in Josh Warrington's hometown of Leeds, England. Josh Warrington fights most of his fights in Leeds, England. Kiko Martinez fights most of his fights in Spain, but has some good experience being a road warrior and fighting on other people's turf. Not always with great success. Like, he lost to Gary Russell in the States. He lost to Zelfa Barrett in England. But when he's fighting Kid Galahad on DAZN, you hear the commentators just marveling at how well Galahad is boxing. Galahad is like switching stances. He's throwing like nice sneaky uppercuts, and he's just outboxing the much shorter. Kiko Martinez is a very short fighter, even relative to the featherweight division. He is 5'5". Josh Warrington, by comparison, is 5'7". Kid Galahad, I believe, is like 5'8". No, he's actually 5'6.5", but he looked a lot taller than Kiko Martinez. But Kiko Martinez was being outboxed. The commentators were letting you know that at every turn of the fight. But then in like the 4th and 5th round, they started to comment on how when Kid Galahad comes in to throw a couple punches, he'll back up in a straight line. And Kiko Martinez's game plan is trying to look for you backing up in a straight line, basically. He's looking to catch you with a big shot, and he'll come lunging in almost an ambush style where he'll throw a hard right hand or throw a sweeping hard left hook. But he's looking to do it in a one-off sort of way. He's, just kind of biding his time, defending himself, trying to keep his head low, while the usually taller fighter is kind of trying to pick him off with combinations and, just kind of pot-shotting and outboxing him. Kiko Martinez is looking to land something big, and boy, did he. At the end of the 5th round, he flattens Kid Galahad with the right hand right on the button, or as the British commentator said, a peach of a right hand. Blasts Kid Galahad, knocks him flat on his back. Kid Galahad gets up, he's holding on, barely makes it out of the round, and in the very opening few seconds of the very next round, Dominic Ingle is like putting water on Kid Galahad's face, telling him to wake up, telling him that he's got to move, that he's got to hold, that he's got to, keep on jabbing, don't back up in a straight line, just giving him all the instructions. Too little, too late. As soon as the 6th round starts, Kiko Martinez blasts Kid Galahad with the first punch of the round. It's another beautiful right hand. Puts Galahad flat on his back and out. The fight is over. Kiko Martinez is unexpectedly, because he was an underdog in this fight, unexpectedly your new IBF Featherweight champion. And now he's fighting Josh Warrington, who is the favorite in this fight, who was basically like one of the favorites of the division because of that run that he went on when he beat Lee Selby, Carl Frampton, Kid Galahad, and so forth. He was just looking like a very exciting fighter. You could feel the spirit of him when he's fighting. He's just like, he's fighting like these very spirited exchanges where he upset Lee Selby, upset Carl Frampton, and the crowd is just stunned that this underdog is coming in and just taking it to the fighters with the bigger names, throwing these great combinations, just showing all the energy in the world, fighting in a way that just makes you believe that he wants it more. Like Josh Warrington was doing all that. And even when he relinquished the title, it was kind of seen as like a, wow, that's a high character move, because it looked like it mattered more for him to fight the fights that matter against the top fighters rather than to just take whatever, you know, mandatory the IBF was throwing in his path. He was trying to make a statement by dropping the belt. And, you know, we all wanted to see him fight either Gary Russell Jr., who was at the time the longtime WBC featherweight champion, or to fight Emmanuel Navarrete, who, of course, they have like promotional, you know, issues where one guy's top ranked, Bob Arum, one guy's Eddie Hearn, Matchroom. But Josh Warrington, you just felt like he was on the brink of greatness, even if on the surface his abilities didn't jump out at you as being absolutely elite. He was certainly looking like an elite fighter just based on his performances, even though, again, that one against Kid Galahad was really close. So he has those two fights with Lara, or the one that he got knocked out cleanly, and then the second one with all the headbutts that they stopped early. Not that they shouldn't have stopped it. I mean, it was a nasty gash of a cut. I felt bad for Lara. And again, I thought Lara was about to like knock Josh Warrington out again. So the question going into Kiko Martinez versus Josh Warrington 2 is, you know, we more or less know what Kiko Martinez has. Like, he's not the fastest pace fighter. He's an older fighter, but he's going to pick his spots, look to land something big. He is going to throw combinations. He's going to be competitive, but he is susceptible to losing rounds against better boxers until he hits them with something hard. Either he will do it or he won't do it. He's also susceptible to getting stopped and knocked out himself. Josh Warrington, we are less sure where he is in his confidence, in his ability to absorb a big punch based on the reaction to getting blasted by Mauricio Lara. We just don't have as clear an idea as to whether Josh Warrington is that same savage that we were watching 2 to 3 years ago. I tend to believe that he's going to be winning the majority of the rounds for as long as Kiko Martinez versus Josh Warrington 2 is lasting. I think that Josh Warrington is going to have a slight edge on the round winning because he's got the greater volume. He's got the better movement. I think he's going to be able to dictate the terms of the exchange more or less because he is a slightly taller fighter. And look, it's hard to imagine that Kiko won't land something big. I think that this might have some remnants of their first fight, which was a very, very competitive fight. I think that Kiko Martinez, like he normally does, is going to do some stalking. But I think that Josh Warrington will still have enough heart and ability and punch absorption ability to withstand the moments that Kiko Martinez has. Like, we could get a knockdown or two of this fight or in this fight, but I actually think that it's going to be Josh Warrington knocking Kiko Martinez down. Maybe not out. I don't think he's going to finish Kiko Martinez. Kiko Martinez might knock him down as well. I just think that it's more likely because I think that he's going to be winning like in the punch stats against Kiko Martinez. I think that he could score a knockdown or something, but I feel like Josh Warrington still has enough to edge a close decision win over Kiko Martinez. And he's certainly going to be the crowd favorite. Again, this is in his hometown, so the crowd's going to be totally on Josh Warrington's side. Josh Warrington, by the way, I said, you know, Matchroom to Zone. He came back to Matchroom. He signed with Eddie Hearn Matchroom early, and then he went to Frank Warren for a good amount of time, up until like 2020, and then he went back to Matchroom. So that kind of played into like him dropping the IBF belt, going back to Matchroom, and then trying to secure a big fight. So there was actually like a period, you know, between October 2019, pre-COVID, and then his fight with Mauricio Lara, which took place in February 2021, like almost a year and a half later, where there was inactivity as Josh Warrington was kind of sorting his career out. I just hope that that inactivity didn't end up spelling the end of his prime elite run. But I do think that he still has enough in the tank. He's not an old fighter by any stretch. He's like 30, 31 years old. Yeah, 31 years old. I don't think he's a shot fighter, even though, again, that was a very, very scary loss against Mauricio Lara, and I didn't like what I saw in the rematch. But I do think that he still has enough boxing ability to pull out a close and somewhat controversial, just a disputed decision where you might have a draw on the scorecard. Like, again, when they fought the first time, this was a majority decision win. So this rematch, I think, can end up being like a split decision win. I don't think it's going to be like a unanimous where the scorecards are reading like 118 to 110 or 117 to 111. I think this is going to be more like a 115 to 113, give or take, a knockdown, 114 to 114-ish type of fight. Or you might even get a lot of people who think that Kiko Martinez deserved the win because either he was landing like the harder shots or Josh Warrington looked like he was on the run for moments of the fight or something like that. I don't think that he's going to demonstratively beat Kiko Martinez, but I think he's going to edge a victory that then re-secures him a share of the belt. I think that he's going to recapture the IBF Featherweight title here. But yeah, let me know what you think about Kiko Martinez versus Josh Warrington 2. By the way, I feel like Mauricio Lara is the one who deserves this title shot against Kiko Martinez. Like, what's up with that? He's the one who got the knockout of Josh Warrington. And it's not like Josh Warrington came back and beat Mauricio Lara. So why is Josh Warrington back in the driver's seat potentially if he beats Kiko Martinez, where Mauricio Lara hasn't lost since beating Josh Warrington, who was the long time, or at least for a few title defenses, the IBF champion. I don't get that one, but I think that, given what Mauricio Lara just did against Emilio Sanchez, I hope that he gets a shot at the winner of Kiko Martinez versus Josh Warrington 2. I think it's well-deserved. And then you can start talking, the winner of, Lara and either Martinez or Josh Warrington taking on, like, Lee Wood. Because Lee Wood's going to have some time off, I believe, after that fight with Michael Conlan. That was just a brutal showdown. But yeah, let me know what you think about Kiko Martinez versus Josh Warrington 2. What do you think of Mauricio Lara, his abilities, and what do you think of his chances going forward at winning more big fights? And what do you think about the state of the featherweight division? Do you, like me, see Emmanuel Navarrete as being the class of the division right now? He's my number one in the division. I thought that I was split between him and Gary Russell Jr. That was the fight that I really wanted to see. I either wanted to see Russell versus Warrington, or if not Russell versus Warrington, then Russell versus Navarrete. But yeah, Mark Magsayo kind of put a stop to all that, even though Gary Russell, obviously hurt his shoulder. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with his, one fight a year career, where that goes from this point forward. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.